So Liz, do you think we actually have any people listening to us who've never read Born to Run?
Good question. I mean, yeah, it's highly unlikely, but
Because if we say we're going to do a podcast on Born to Run, everybody will just switch off.
maybe not. Maybe they'll enjoy reliving Born to Run. You know, it was a very good book, and what if it's somebody that only started running in the last 10 years?
Okay, well, before they get away, we should tell them probably that one, it's a fantastic book, just like they remember, because they've all read it. And two, reading it or listening to it a second time is even better than the first time. Because I found reading it again to do a podcast on it, it was even better than I remember.
Me too. I had the same experience.
And I guess it's possible that there's lots of people who've never read it, but they don't like to admit to their friends that they haven't read it. So everybody goes, "Oh yeah, Born to Run, yeah." And lots of people in running groups go, "Yeah, Born to Run," but they never read it. They just heard people talking about it and figured they should have read it in order to be credible runners.
Yeah, you're right. Or then maybe then there's the ones that think, well, because it has the reputation to be the book that started the minimalist revolution, and now that that's over, they're probably like, well, why would I want to read that? It's sort of like old news.
Anyway, for the people, if they haven't read it and they sort of don't like to admit that they haven't read it, one, your secret's safe with us. Two, going to tell you all about it, so you'll be super well informed. So off we go with Born to Run.
Hi, and welcome to the Running Book Reviews podcast, where we review running books to help you decide if you would like to read the book for yourself. We hope that listening to us chat about running can help keep you motivated about your own running, or maybe inspire you to try something new. My name is Liz Macrusa, and my co-host Alan and I are together today to talk about Born to Run by Christopher McDougal.
So this book is a relatively old book, but one of the best known books in running book history, I would guess. It's more than 10 years old now, I think, 2009. But if you do a search for the best running books or the best-selling running books of all time, Born to Run will come up always in the top three. And in fact, sometimes Born to Run, the book will come up, and Born to Run, the audiobook will come up as well. So it's clearly one of the most storied and talked about and read and well-loved books in running history. So we thought we should give it some justice and talk about it. It's also credited of having started and galvanized the minimalist running shoe revolution. And it has a subtitle. The subtitle of Born to Run is A Hidden Tribe, Super Athletes, and the Greatest Race the World Has Ever Seen. It kind of starts with Runner's World magazine commissioning Chris McDougal to write an article about a little-known tribe in Mexico called the Tarahumara or Tarahumara, and he goes to investigate, and it turns into a huge story, and centers a little bit around a character called Cabello Blanco. I guess the Mexican pronunciation might be Caballo Blanco, but I'm probably going to say Caballo Blanco all the way through. He's kind of a semi-mythical figure who adopts the lifestyle of the native Tarahumaras, and he organizes a race to put super ultra runner superstars like Scott Jurek and some other people up against the natives to see whether they can match their running skills. So for people who don't know Christopher McDougal, a little bit about Christopher McDougal. Chris is a journalist originally and a former war correspondent, so writing from war zones. Of course, he's a journalist. Everybody who writes running books we've ever spoken to, yeah, seem to be. He's the 3 times National Magazine Award finalist. And he's written for all the famous magazines, not just running and health and fitness magazines, but New York Times and New York Magazine, all kinds of magazines, prestigious ones. He currently lives and runs amongst Amish farms in Pennsylvania, and has written 2 books since Born to Run. In fact, the Amish farms feature heavily in his latest book, Running with Sherman, which will be, I think, subject of a future podcast from ourselves.
And it's the reason why Chris McDougal couldn't be with us, because he's on to bigger and better things now.
Yeah, but he will be with us when we talk about his Running with Sherman latest book. Something that I saw as well that I don't know if it's true or not, but I saw it on the internet, so it must be, is that they're thinking of making a film about Born to Run, featuring Matthew McConaughey as the runner Caballo Blanco.
Oh, that's super interesting. I would
That would be good. Yeah,
I would want to see the
with
movie.
current circumstances, maybe it's all been cancelled or they've pushed it back for 2 or 3 years, but that would be very cool. I'm always saying, "Oh, when are you going to make the film?" to an author, and I actually found out that they're talking about making a film.
And there is a little film. Remember the one about the Tarahumara girl that was running in sandals, and she went to all these really long races, and she ended up getting it. The film is on Netflix, and I can't remember what it's called, but
It's called Lorena of the Light Feet or something like that.
yeah, it was kind of short, but it was really interesting because she was kind of just very quiet. So most of the film is her being very quiet. But at one point, so she's really good and she's winning all these really long races. So she gets all these free Solomon shoes. And at one point, she's like, she's showing the person that's filming like her all the shoes she has, and she has them like all stacked up in like a garbage bag. And the guy asks her, "So are you gonna wear them?" And she said, "Well, everybody that wears these are slower than me, so I think I'm just going to use my sandals."
That's excellent. What I thought was good about that little film, Lorena, on Netflix, was you get to see the towns that are talked about and the farms that are talked about in Born to Run. So if you don't have a good mind picture or you're imagining a certain thing, you can actually see it there. And what I found was it's a lot more mountainous than I thought and not as deserty. It's obviously very hot at times, but you get to see the dresses that they wear, the clothing that they wear, and what the farms and the houses that they live in look like, which is kind of cool. Okay, so on to Born to Run.
I guess it starts out by Chris McDougal asking himself why he's always injured.
Yeah, I think one of the chapters starts with "My foot hurts," and he explains to us that 80% or more of runners get injured every year. He's pointed out, or I guess it's probably Runners World who point out this tribe in Mexico where they have this really simple living. They have no sophisticated diets, no sophisticated training, but they seem to be able to run barefoot or on sandals fantastically quick without getting injured. So it begs the question, how come?
Yeah, and so he wants to go and sort of see why. But the only person that can take him to meet these people or visit the place is this kind of elusive character that later is Caballo Blanco, but it's not his real name. But he's sort of this white guy that integrated himself into their way of being, and so they accept him kind of as one of them. And he kind of like also started running around in the Copper Canyons, wearing sandals and just sort of living.
So the first part of the adventure is try to find him, get him to introduce Chris to the natives, who are super shy as well. They're very quiet and they keep themselves to themselves. The history of that, I think, is they've had a history of being, I guess, persecuted down through history by missionaries or the Wild West pushing through, or even further back, the conquistadors, and being affected by diseases that they're not normally subject to. And so they've developed a culture of being quite recluse, quite shy, and often avoiding people from outside their culture. And that's why Chris needs the introduction. He's never going to be able to find these people and talk meaningfully with them.
Yeah, because apparently they just hide. They hide. If they see people, they'll hide, and you'll never even have seen them. Apparently, they're experts at hiding.
They sound like the sort of human equivalent of mountain lions. You know, they're watching you, and you're not even aware that they're there.
Yeah.
Okay, so off they go to Mexico, and there's a whole series of passages where Chris is talking with people who are saying, "Oh, I think I've seen this guy, Cabala Blanco. He's in the next village," and he goes to the next village.
And it was like, oh, you just missed him.
Yeah, he
He
was
was heading
here.
this way.
You need to get to the next town, otherwise, he'll be gone in a day because he keeps moving around. And it's quite sort of mystical and surreal, really. Chris is sort of wondering whether he's a ghost or just a fairy story at one stage, I think.
Yeah, he did say that. And also he has to go through some sort of rough parts of Mexico where that are known for like drug cartels and all those kinds of things. And so I guess that's where his experience being a war journalist comes in handy, because he was willing to go there.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be scared of those things.
No, except for the one time where they ended up being somewhere, and they were in their car, and there was like a red pickup that stopped and was just sort of watching them for a little while and then drove on.
Yeah, it's clearly some sort of drug warlord or something.
Yeah.
Given by the nature of the car.
Yeah, and so they kind of stopped and just didn't do anything until that pickup ended up leaving, and then they went on. But in the book, it's kind of a scary moment.
So eventually they talk to a whole bunch of people, go to a whole bunch of places. You get a good flavor of the sorts of place that they're working in and living in, because it's all rumors and stories and hearsay. They eventually find him in a town or near a town called Creel, and he's a very skittish, suspicious sort of guy, wondering, why people want to have anything to do with him. And in fact, he's not interested in society that much. He's interested in just being out in the wild and doing his thing.
But finally, Chris sort of convinces him that he's a safe person to interact with. And I think in the end, Caballo is interested in Chris McDougal because he's a journalist, first of all, and because he's a runner. And Caballo has this idea that he wanted to put on a race, and he calls it always like the greatest race the world has never seen, because it would be with the Tarahumara, and he wants to have like other really long distance runners come, like some of the ultra trail runners. One of them, Scott Jurek, which is interesting because the first time I read the book, I kind of skipped over the name because it meant nothing to me, and now I know how much he's accomplished, and I was like, wow.
Since we discussed North, you've got a whole new view on Scott
I've
Jurek.
got a whole new view on Scott Jurek, and he actually, he had all these names he wanted to invite for this big race that he wanted to put on, and he had to convince the Tarahumara to show up at a certain place with all these other runners from the regular world. And so he thought Chris McDougal could sort of help him out, and that's why he kind of accepted him in the end.
Yeah, and that didn't come sort of easily or quickly. I don't think.
Nope.
It was sort of the gradual trust building process. The story actually takes you into the Mexican desert looking for Caballo Blanco. And as it progresses along, it jumps out every so often to give you background stories and history on things. It jumps out to talk a bit about the running prowess of the Tarahumaras and their first appearance in Western culture at one of the Leadville 100 races. There's a guy called Rick Fisher who sounds a bit like a wheeler dealer sort of guy, not necessarily super nice, but he seems to have persuaded some Tarahumaras to come and run a Leadville 100. And this is sort of the Western world's first experience of seeing these people dressed in non-running gear, really farm gear,
Mm-hmm.
and running these super long races in these very simple sandals, just made out of bits and pieces that they've found, like car tires or something like that, and being able to run steady, long, and fast. And this guy has, I think, as a sort of commercial venture, he's very protective of the Tarahumara. He doesn't want them talking to anyone else, and he's persuaded them to come along, and he's sort of their manager.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really know what's going on, but he sort of negotiated with the race to have these people turn up. And the book talks us through these naive, innocent natives from Mexico turning up to Leadville ultramarathon trail race, 100 miles. And in fact, there's a bit of history about Leadville as well, how Leadville sort of is developed because of mining dying and the town dying, and then trying to recreate the town as a bit of a sporting mountain adventure town. So these guys turn up, and there's a couple of years where they come along, and there are a few chapters that talk us through their experience or their performance at the Leadville 100.
Yeah, it wasn't so great at the beginning because they what happened was they got these regular running shoes that they weren't so used to, and they didn't really, I think, understand the whole concept of that type of race because their type of racing is a little bit different, and so they didn't win, and that was the goal. It was for them to win, and they didn't. Uh, but when I think they came back and they impressed. So at one point, the book mentions that the famous coach came to see this Leadville 100 finish because the Tarahumara were there, and that famous coach is who I didn't know before even, but it was Joe Vigil. And so that's kind of one of the things that I ended up picking out the second time I read the book. The first time I read the book, that had sort of escaped me. Like, it was just this guy standing at the finish line just waiting for these runners to come in, and it was 4 a.m. and he's holding his coffee.
And you realize he's one of the most successful coaches in distance running in U.S. history.
Mm-hmm.
Joe Vigil, that we did the podcast of his book of his life story called Chasing Excellence a couple of months ago. So the eventually this guy Rick Fisher, I think he's paying the Tarahumara villagers in bags of corn to get them to run Leadville, and eventually he gets some good natives to come along, and they end up coming. I think it's in 1993. They end up coming. There's 5 of them, and they run as a unit, and they start slowly at the back, and then they just pick everybody up. They never stop, and I think all 5 of them do extremely well, and the best ones come first and second, which is a real eye opener. And then we get a story of another famous person, Anne Trayson, who I didn't know much about because I came into ultra running after she dropped out from the public eye a little bit. But she's probably the most decorated ultra runner, certainly female, of all time, with 14 Western State victories. In the
Hmm.
modern day, that's totally almost impossible to imagine.
And she was like a science teacher, and she started running ultra distances a little bit by accident. She just started by running. Then eventually she decided to run to work, and it was 9 miles each way. Eventually she started just running to work every day. So she would be running 18 miles a day every day of the week. And on the weekend, she would just decide, well, since I'm not working, I should run more on the weekend. So she would run even more on the weekend. And there was like they described like one Saturday, she went for like a run in the morning. I'm gonna say it's 20 miles because I don't remember the exact amount. And then she had lunch and decided, or she came home and had breakfast and decided, oh, I feel pretty good. Like I think I'll go do another run. And so she went for another run. Like, and then she had some chores to do, so she came home and she did her chores and she had some food, and then she was like, well, since I did my chores, I'm just going to reward myself by going for another run. And she ended up running like 50 miles on that Saturday, just because she felt like it. And she started winning all these races, but all the longer races. And so then her goal later became, well, I want to win overall, and I want to win a major event overall. So because in ultra running, it's not uncommon for women to beat men as the distances get longer.
Probably back in the day in 1994 when she was running, it was a little less common. But yeah, as the distances get longer, it gets more equal. And she certainly, we hear the story in Born to Run of her taking on the Leadville field to try and win the race overall, going through halfway in a record pace, and looking to beat everyone and all of the Tarahumara invitees as well. She goes out at some crazy, crazy pace, and she gets caught eventually by the best, most capable Tarahumara, and she ends up coming second. But she actually improves the women's record for Leadville by 2 hours.
Which is huge.
Yeah, which is a massive time. And the thing is, Joe Vigil, this wise old coach, is watching all of this and going, okay, what is it that makes this tribe of Tarahumaras so special and so capable of doing this type of running? It's clearly possible for everybody to run like that because I see Andresen basically doing it. So he concludes that it's not like some magic,
Mm-hmm.
or just something just in the genetics, but it's part of their conditioning, and it's possible for anyone to do that. And as we know about Joe Vigil, he's trying to always decipher the puzzles, work out how people can be better. And it was clear to him that Andresen had whatever it is that these guys from the Tarahumara tribe, what they had in order to run this fast. And what that means is that in theory anybody could do that, but they clearly had some secret sauce.
And he had some theories about the secret sauce. So he ended up saying that when he watched them come in, what he saw, because he watched they always run as a pack, and he watched two of them come in, and they were like laughing and chatting and and having fun. And he was like, well, that must be it. It must be the love of life that sort of gives them that sort of edge over everybody else.
Yeah, they certainly don't. They don't come in all smashed. For them, it's just like part of their life and part of living, and they have a different mental attitude to it. And I think the approach is sort of easy, light, but fast. One of the things with ultra running and Leadville 100 is that like many ultra runs, you're allowed to have pacers. But of course, these Tarahumaras didn't know anything about that, so they didn't have pacers. So Rick Fisher went into the town to sort of drum up in Leadville to drum up some or hire some pace runners for his tribesmen. And one of the people that they picked up, and this is where the stories connect, was some young, shaggy-haired runner who turned out to be quite a capable runner. Who, when the Tarahumara realized that they were just getting a little bit abused by this system, by Rick Fisher, and they went off back to the Copper Canyons and back to Mexico, that this guy who was pacing their lead runner, he went with them. And this guy turned out to be a chap called Micah True, who eventually became Cabello Blanco. So he originally got into the story by being a pace runner for one of the tribesmen at Leadville. And I think he appreciated their attitude and their culture and their laid back approach so much, he went back with them and adopted their lifestyle.
So I guess the next part of the book was, explaining a little bit about Chris McDougal's journey into becoming more injury resistant, because he ends up, in this story with Caballo Blanco wanting to set up this race, but Chris McDougal, like his prime, reason for searching out this tribe and everything was to try and figure out how is it possible that these people will run 200 miles or will run these really long distances and never get injured. I guess not often, and he will get injured running 10K.
And I guess part of that is, I'm not sure if this is the right time and context for it, but part of that is they're running naturally on flat sandals or barefoot, and they've been doing that all their life. Don't really want to wear modern shoes, and there's some indication in the book that that's the most natural way to run. And I think the media sort of picked up on that when the book first came out, and that's why it sparked the barefoot, what would you call it? No, well, I guess a revolution. The barefoot mode or the minimalist mode of running shoes.
Yeah, because then all of a sudden, all the companies were making shoes with like 0 heel to toe drop and very minimal cushioning. Yeah, so the book came out in 2009, and the minimalist sort of era, I think, was a little bit later, maybe 2012, 2013, something around there. I mean, I remember wearing a pair of New Balance Minimus shoes for a few years, and it was in those years. So I'm guessing, sometime not long before that, I think, but after the book, because he was told by Caballo that you have to, you kind of have to be light on your feet, and he converted himself by going to live in the Copper Canyons with these great runners and wearing sandals just like they do, made out of basically a strip of tire to protect the bottom, and then some leather rope to kind of tie the rubber to their feet, and they would just go run like that in sandals.
So Chris finds Cabala Blanco in the desert and sees where he's living. And Cabala Blanco has this ambition to have some of the best runners come out and race this race. But because of his lifestyle and his attitude, he's not the best race director in the world to organize a run like this. And of course, it's not the best place in the world. So
he's not very organized.
Very ad hoc and very casual and crazy in some ways that Caballo Blanco sends an email off to Scott Jurek, and Scott Jurek decides that he's going to come and run this race just on one email and a bit of exchange. The idea being that it'll be some of the best ultra runners from America running in the backyard of the Tarahumara in their country. I think the idea is for it to be 60 miles. It would be 30 miles out and 30 miles back, sort of an out and back run. But it all sounds a bit casual in the way that it's organized. So we wonder whether it's ever going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, Cabela Blanco has to send emails, but he has to do a round trip of about 60 miles in order to get to a dial-up line to send an email. So it's not like you can just text him and say, "Oh, hi." You send a message, you hear nothing for a week. He picks up his emails when he comes through the town, which has the dial-up, answers his mail then, and then you hear nothing for 2 weeks. And so it's this kind of organization. But Chris is sort of roped in to be involved in this race, and Scott agrees to come. And there are a few other characters and people who have ultra runner pedigrees,
Mm-hmm.
who are all sort of roped in. So we go through then a list of the characters who are going to go and eventually meet down in Mexico in the Copper Canyons to run this race against the Tarahumara crack runners, the best of the tribe.
So I guess maybe we can name some of them, because some of them are a little bit. So Scott Jurek is probably the most famous, but then there's Luis Escobar, and I think we actually heard about him in Scott Jurek's book.
Yeah, when we did North, he was the photographer and helped Scott for part of it. And in North, they refer to, we met up in Mexico. Well, this is the story of them where they met up.
Mm-hmm. And then there's this guy, Barefoot Ted, who they call him Barefoot Ted because he thought he could end running injuries by not wearing shoes. And it sort of sounds like he was the one that got those Vibram 5 fingers popularized, because those were originally like boating shoes, so that, you'd give you grippy rubber to stick to wet surfaces. And they had like the little, your toes all go into their separate little compartment, but there was nothing really to the shoe, and he decided he was going to run in those. And I feel like that's probably how they got so popular with runners afterwards.
Certainly, this guy was a big advocate of barefoot running or flat foot running. Then there was the young power couple.
Yeah, Jen and Billy.
Jen Shelton and Billy Barnett. Both of them seem like really wild childs, like absolute party animals, but fantastic, aggressive, courageous, and sometimes crazy ultra runners.
Yeah, and there were parts of the story where you were like, "Oh my gosh, are they going to die in the Copper Canyon?" Because the one time at one point they got lost. They did things like they drank.
They get extremely drunk the night before a big training event or a race or whatever, and super dehydrated, and just get up and go.
Yeah, and a few times, like like Chris would say, "Oh, let's let them sleep in," because they would, they went to bed really late. They were really drunk, like they're going to have a big hangover. But they would kind of always wake up in the nick of time and be like, "Hey guys, wait for us." And just sort of like, I don't even know, they just got dressed and they left. And one of the times that they did that, they just brought like a little hand bottle for water, and they got lost. And yeah, they ended up
started to think they were going to die.
Yeah, and they ended up drinking from like some swampy looking
swamp pool or something. Yeah.
And then they finally got one of the others found them, and so they were kind of saved. But then when they got back to where Chris was and all of them, they started to be worried, like, "Oh no, what are they going to end up catching by drinking this water?" So they made them drink water with iodine pills in it, with the kind of the theory that maybe they could chase the bacteria with the iodine pills that they
kind of sterilize them from the inside.
Yeah, I don't know if that would really work, but they didn't get sick in the book, so I think everything worked out for them. They also had Chris brought along his trainer. He kind of hired this trainer named Eric, and his trainer was getting him to run injury free because Chris really wanted to do this event in the end. after initially thinking it was crazy, he wanted to participate. So he had to be able to run at least 50K injury free. And Eric was like, I will get you to that point, but you have to bring me to the race. So he ended up tagging along.
So everybody's just sort of negotiating their way into it. And it's casual. And if you know somebody, bring your buddy. And
yeah, and even the Tarahumara, they were sort of like Caballo Blanco's responsibility to arrange. So some of them showed up, and she sort of mentally had a list in his head, being like, "Oh, it'd be good if this person came and that person came." But in the end, like he was not sure anybody would show up.
yeah, he doesn't know if they're going to come or not because they're sort of non-committal, or they say they will, but then they disappear. And there are some in particular that he's very keen on. There's a guy called Arnulfo,
Mm-hmm.
who's one of the best runners, and he ends up featuring in the race. A chap called Manuel Luna, and there's Silverino, I think, and some others who eventually turn up. I think at the last minute, quite a few turn up.
Yeah, they do. At the last minute.
Caballo Blanco is having a heart attack, thinking he's stressing out because he's not used to doing these kind of things. And then people start to show.
Mm-hmm. He has a good showing in the end, so you're kind of happy for him because, like, you see that it really means a lot to him, and he ends up having a good number of people there, and nobody gets lost or dies or anything like that. So one person that sort of caused Caballo a little bit of grief was Barefoot Ted, because Caballo was sort of like, you can't run in 5 fingers. Because like the rocks are gonna cut through them, like they're not they're not strong enough, like this is rough country. And Barefoot Ted is sort of like very adamant that he's gonna wear these 5 fingers, and I think he has some sandals or something, but no real shoes. At one point, I think he ends up having they go on a training run, and afterwards, like his feet are all bandaged up. But he's still insisting that he's completely fine.
Yeah, and I think he makes a bet with Caballo Blanco that he's going to be able to run in his 5 fingers. He's an absolute religious zealot around barefoot running. So we hear a bit about the pedigree of Jen and Billy, who, although they're wild childs, are actually very, very capable runners. Have run and won some serious US ultra races. So although it's ragtag in terms of how it's organized, certainly the people in it, they're the best of the Tarahumara tribe and some of the best ultra runners, certainly in North America, if not on the planet at that time.
So we get to we kind of zoom out a bit from the race for a few chapters. The Chris talks about some history of running and some stats and things like that. There's a scientist called Dr. Lieberman who says that if there is one magic bullet to make human beings healthy, it's to run. There's also a lot of other kind of stats around it, but they talk about running shoes, and this is probably also thing that contributed to the minimalist kind of era of running shoes.
About softer shoes and more protective shoes, promoting harder foot strikes and harder heel strikes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're barefoot, you can't make those potential injury causing strikes, and that a lot of shoes were designed to prevent pronation, overpronation, when in fact they're only 2 to 3%, less than 5% of true problematic overpronators.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people are getting corrected for problems that they don't actually have.
Yeah, he actually has sort of like 3 painful truths, he calls them. The first one is that the best shoes are the worst, meaning that the top of the line shoes, apparently he found that runners were 123% more likely to get injured than the cheap shoes, which is kind of interesting. Then painful truth number 2 was feet like a good beating. So that goes, the cushioning. He mentions Dr. Barry Bates found that as shoes wore down, the cushioning thinned and runners gained foot control. So like they found that actually when the shoes were worn out and sort of the foam is all compressed and hard, it it's almost better in a certain way, which is, sort of it's like the opposite of what we kind of think. We're sort of like, oh, my shoes are getting old. Like maybe that's why I have these aches and pains, or maybe it's not all bad. And then the painful truth number 3 is human beings are designed to run without shoes. And basically he just says that we evolved for so many years and we didn't have shoes. Also because, like, he talks about plantar fasciitis and how common it is. They found that it can go away by wearing thin-soled shoes. Some patients had success in curing their plantar fasciitis, which I think this might be also why, people got injured with the minimalist running shoes, was because they probably read this section of the book and were like, oh my God, this is what I need to do. It's going to cure me of everything and it's going to be the solution to all my problems. But really, it's still about applying all the logic, I guess. Like you need to come back from injury slowly and get used to different things slowly, because it's not, if you've been wearing very cushioned running shoes for your entire adult life, I mean, it's not like
your legs are
one
not
run.
conditioned. Your feet are not conditioned. Your Achilles tendon's not conditioned, and therein lies the problem. Okay, so what's next?
Well, there were a few chapters that sort of, were not about the racing.
A bit about persistent hunting and
Yeah, they talk about
the
that.
evolution of Homo sapiens as runners is quite fascinating. They eventually find, and in fact, a tribe in the Kalahari Desert is still doing it, able to track and hunt down an animal by just separating it from the crowd and hunting it down, always pushing it, the same animal out of its herd, and keep chasing it until it exhausts itself, and chasing an animal for 5 hours to a point where the animal is so exhausted they can catch it. And not only can they catch it, but they find that once they've caught it and they have to feed their family is following up behind them. And all the young kids and the old guys and the pregnant moms are all able to still run. We hear that, in long distance running, if you start at, 17 or 18, it takes you about 8 years to reach a peak, but it takes you about another 45 years to decline from that peak back to where you were 8 years before. And what that tells you is that a tribe who are hunting through their evolution, okay, they've got some crack runners who are able to run an animal to exhaustion just by continually making it move for 5 hours. But the whole tribe can still move reasonably well so that when they catch an animal, they don't have to take it 5 hours back. The rest of the tribe are moving up behind them. And there's some great stories which are towards telling you about the background of human evolution and how we got to be the runners that we are. Why, despite the fact that we don't have claws, we're not the fastest animal on the planet, we're not the most aggressive, we're able to still evolve and dominate because of our intelligence, but also because of our ability to run with stamina, long distances, and recover from that.
And this would be why, to stay healthy, you almost need that much movement, because if you evolved with a lot of movement, makes sense.
Yeah, so after 10 million years of evolution have given you that, don't go and sit down in a chair and spend all your time doing nothing.
For 8 hours.
Maybe in 10 million years' time, we'll have evolved as a tribe of chair sitters. But at the moment, that's not us, is it?
It's not, no. And actually, they do talk a little bit about health and the American diet. So he touches on that a little bit, and he has a few examples. Like apparently, the Japanese had almost no cancer until they started eating like the Americans. And within a decade, mortality from colon, prostate, and breast cancer skyrocketed. And you have a famous quote from Joe Vigil, which actually we read in his book too, I think. He says, "Eat like a poor person and you will only see your doctor on the golf course." So it just means,
except if you're a poor person, you can't afford to go to the golf course.
True. That's true. And Chris actually goes on his own little health journey, because he says in the book that he was a little overweight. Like it was not overweight. That's the wrong term. I think he just said he was like heavy, like a heavier runner, and so he wanted
Yeah.
to be a bit lighter. And so he goes to see this lady, Dr. Ruth, and she makes him eat breakfast salad because she has sort of this theory that you should try and eat, I think it's 13 portions of fruit or vegetables a day.
Yeah.
And in order to get that much in, you need to eat some for breakfast, and the best way to get those in is by eating salad for breakfast, because it starts off your morning with like a
Yeah.
large dose of fruits and vegetables. And so he ends up trying it, and he actually likes having salad for breakfast because he says in the end he can like eat until he's stuffed but still go for a run an hour later with no problem.
Yeah, and then they do some comparison of, okay, all this advice, all this super technical advice that Coach Vigil has discovered and nutritionists have discovered. Then they go back and look at the Tarahumara tribe, and they find that basically they're doing that naturally.
Mm-hmm.
They're out in the farms. They have games for their children. They're involved with running and just having fun running, but long distances and fast speeds, different sorts of games. And then they have diets with some naturally available vegetation and cereals.
Yeah, they pretty much have to grow all their own food, so
Yeah, they've kind of got all of that, and they've had it for decades and decades and decades,
mm-hmm.
maybe without realizing it.
And they don't have McDonald's, so I guess that helps.
No, they don't have the temptations and the convenience foods that we have. Not that we ever eat those, Liz.
No, and then never eat those. We never eat gummies on the run.
Hey, gummies are all natural. Well, mostly.
Mostly.
Okay, so then I guess then we come up to all of this combines up, and then we come back into the story with getting ready to go to Mexico and then rendezvous to do the race if it ever gets organized and ever manages to occur, to do the race as specified by Caballo Blanco. So off they go. And well, first of all, the Tarahumara guys all turn up, all the best guys turn up as if by magic. They just sort of wander into the town, and all the people who are from the West have all come to run. Scott and people like that are all given trail names. So they all get their trail names from the Mexicans.
And Scott is El Venado, which is a deer in Spanish. And I'm probably saying that really wrong. And Chris is Oso,
which is bear.
And one of the Tarahumara remembers Chris from the last visit. So one of them named Arnulfo. I'm probably saying that wrong as well.
Yeah.
But he remembers Chris from the last time. So they it's almost like a little bit of a reunion, some recognition.
And in fact, quite a few tribes people come in as well from neighboring townships and villages because they want to see this race.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of probably the greatest thing that's ever happened in that area.
And then the starting village also makes it like a party. So they end up, like some of them cook food and they're all there, and it ends up being almost like a big long party for the duration of the race.
I think I said the course was 60 miles at the start, but it's actually 50 miles, I think.
Yeah, I don't really remember.
But it has something like
oh yes,
it has 6,500 feet of climbing as well.
Yep, 50 miles is what they said in chapter 31.
And the course is Y-shaped, so that they can kind of stand at the central point of the Y, and they can see people coming in and coming out again and going out on another leg.
Which can be either really encouraging or really discouraging, because if you're just entering the Y and you see the person that you want to beat is exiting the Y, you're like, oh no, I'm that far behind.
Without too much ceremony on the morning of the go into the race, people are plus or minus well prepared for this. I guess one of the best prepared people is probably Chris, because he's been doing a lot of training and transforming his lifestyle around his running. But the person who goes off the hardest from the beginning, quite predictably, is Jen. So she goes like, the day is cool. When it gets hot, I'm going to be dead. So before I get to that point, let's go full bore. And she sets off and she sets the early pace, I think.
In the end, I don't even remember how they all finished. Oh no, I have it here. Arnulfo won, Scott was second, and Silvino is third. Yeah, Jen didn't have a very good race in the end. She ended up kind of burning out, and she was actually caught by Billy in the end, and they just kind of ran it in together. So she ran out really hard and paid for it basically.
I think Jen sort of crashed and burned. Um, Silvino and Anolfo, the two Tarahumaras, got far out ahead of Scott, but Scott was sort of running them down as the race was going on, and he was showing the true champion that he is, was chasing them, reducing the gap as the race got further and further on. And he was able to catch Silvino and pass him, but he wasn't able to catch Arnolfo, who came in first. And people wondered whether Scott, as the Western guy, would be kind of have a bad reaction to that. And there's a scene in the book where Scott goes over to Arnolfo, and everybody's watching to see what Scott's reaction will be. And Scott just walks up to Arnolfo and bows to him, as if to say, "You're a true ultra runner with a fantastic ability and a superb spirit," which is kind of cool. It's what you want to see from people in the sport.
Yeah, and I find that like the overall sort of the end of the whole race just seemed very amicable, and everybody was kind of happy, and you saw that I think it was Jen and Billy that they got some prize money.
Yeah.
And they ended up donating it to the Tarahumara, which is kind of a nice gesture. And you kind of see, they kind of explain a few little things like that. Like it was just very friendly at the end. I mean, when the race was on, it was definitely on. But once it was over, it was sort of just, they were all friends.
Yeah, Chris eventually manages to finish. He's much further back. I think he finishes in 12 hours, far back from the sort of pro runners. It's dark by the time he gets back. But Cabala Blanco goes out and accompanies him and kind of runs as his pacer in terms of bringing him back in. So good spirit shown by lots of people.
And I think Scott Jurek was at the finish line cheering him in when he got there.
Probably everybody was there at the finish line, I would imagine, because probably nowhere else to go either. But probably a party would be had by the Tarahumara because that's their way. And we actually get right at the end the true story, because Cabala Blanco never talked about himself, but he actually told Chris his backstory. We knew that he was formerly known as Micah True in California, and he used to go back to California and just raise some money for a month every so often and then come back to Mexico. But in fact, even though his name was known in California as Micah True, that wasn't his actually original name. Apparently, he was born Michael Randall Hickman.
And he was this, apparently this very sensitive kid, and he was forced to move a lot, and he would take boxing lessons. So he would take boxing lessons and he would box, but he didn't like to knock people out. And the first time he knocked someone out, he ended up crying. So that was kind of his story. You sort of saw in the end that he was kind of a sensitive guy. You kind of got the feeling like he was just, he enjoyed the Copper Canyons because he could sort of hide from the world. And
yeah, he seemed happy to live out of a van and just run. Was a lifestyle. And he eventually found with the Tarahumara tribe that fitted perfectly to his lifestyle, and the Tarahumara gave him, I guess, the trail name of Cabala Blanco, White Horse. But every time he went back to Boulder to raise some money so he could go back to Mexico for his lifestyle, he would use the name Micah True. And in fact, in Kixology, we heard a little reference to this guy, Micah True, who was running in sandals when we were talking about Kixology, the book on running shoes. Brian Metzler actually meets this guy, Micah True. And this turns out to be Cabala Blanco in the Born to Run.
That's interesting. I don't remember that part.
There you go. All the books are gradually linking together.
Yeah, they are. It's pretty neat. And especially this one, the second time around reading it, I really got a lot more out of it, because all these names I didn't know before. Like I didn't know Scott Jurek and the other runners. I mean, some of them I still didn't know, like Jen and Billy I'd never heard of before, but But, like Scott Jurek finally turned out to be a really important guy. And Joe Vigil, who is like the legendary coach of the US and pretty much started coaching programs in the US. He was in the book, and I didn't remember that. So there was just so much in this book that the first time around kind of passed me by, and this time around, like, it was like reading a different book.
So I guess what we would say is, if you've never read it, it's a great story, but it's also a great read in terms of historical background these days. And if you have read it, go and find your book and read it again, because there's
Yeah,
all
you'd be
kinds of things in it.
surprised.
Yes.
You'd be surprised at all the things you missed the first time.
Yeah, Chris McDougal has left us a little jewel that we can go and revisit from time to time. And I guess one final word on Cabela Blanco is North Face actually offered him a sponsorship because he became quite a well-known character. He declined it because it didn't fit with his lifestyle. He just said running should be free and everybody should be free to run, which is that's how he lived. Eventually sadly he died, and he was found dead on a trail in Mexico. I think it was in 2012 or 13. He lived the lifestyle that he loved, and he died doing the thing that he loved.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that. I guess we can go on to like what we thought about the book, because that was pretty much the book.
Well, I guess what I've already said was the book's better the second time around. Maybe because I know some of the characters, like you said, and maybe I know the philosophy and credos of ultra running a bit better. And, we've had 10 years to absorb the background story of this. That just makes it all more richer. I was surprised reading it for the second time that the part about minimalist running is relatively minor in the book, I think. It's not as big. Everybody goes, oh, yeah, it's the book that started minimalist running. It kind of didn't. People picked up on some aspects of the story and started the minimalist running thing. The book itself doesn't go, oh, minimalist running. It just sucks kind of
it
little
doesn't.
bit in there. And I think because I've been programmed by the media, I was expecting to see more on minimalist running in Born to Run and didn't remember. And then when I read it, there's not that much in there. And I guess that's good, because I was thinking perhaps it would say some outmoded things about everybody should do minimalist running, which it doesn't. It just talks about that and how it fits into the overall thing. So I think it's still relevant, still holds true if you take it in context. It's a fantastic story with some great characters. The people, Scott Jurek, and a few people, but the people that don't know and you get to know, they're fascinating. And they're not ordinary people. They're not normal people. So that's cool. In terms of reading the book, the chapters are very short, so it's quite readable. You just have to hold in your mind the main story, which is, going to Mexico and doing the race, because it dips in and out. So it'll pause and give you an aside, and you go, okay, I'm paused on the story. I have to remember where I'm at with that. Let's go and learn something about Leadville, or let's go and learn something about human physiology, or let's go and learn something about history, and then come back to the story. So that was fantastic. I was sort of pleasantly surprised by rereading the book. I was expecting to go, well, it's not as good, but I'm actually reversed. I would say it's even better than I remember. We haven't given books stars for a long time, but I would give it 5 stars.
I guess I'm going to echo a little bit everything you said, because I feel like the book was much better the second time around, and part of it is because I know so much more about running and runners, that I got more out of it, but also because like I didn't remember all the little asides, like what they said about like how Leadville got started, and like what Leadville did, like how Leadville, the town, came to be. And so that was all really interesting. Like I really didn't remember that, and a bunch of other things. And so it was really great to reread it. And like you said, it's a really easy read. I think that maybe if you're somebody that's a bit new to running, it could be a little overwhelming with names of people and stats, like when they start talking about about running shoes and those kinds of things. Like it does have a lot of information. I think it's it's really great if you've been running for a while and you've heard about some of these things. And I also found that, like you said, I was expecting there to be more minimalist stuff in here because, I mean, it's just so well known for being the book that started the minimalist revolution that I kind of like, I was like, well, maybe I just don't remember all the things about minimalist running. But yeah, there really wasn't that much. The little chapter about running shoes, and you got Barefoot Ted, who's kind of a character in there, and then you have, every so often you'll talk about the Tarahumara Indians, how they run in sandals, but like it doesn't anywhere say go out and run barefoot. It's sort of, I guess that's sort of like how people interpreted it, and then went out and bought themselves some five fingers after Barefoot Ted ran a whole 50 miles in them. I think in ratings, I would give it a 4.5.
Oh, you're tough.
I mean, it
This is just
is.
like when we go training.
I
We do the same
know.
training, but you're tougher on yourself. You stop your watch every time that we stop running. And I go, well, I'm still standing on my feet, so I'm not stopping my watch. You stop your watch.
Yes, because it's non-running time. If I'm standing, I am not moving forward. I guess part of it is like the story is just so out there. It parts of it just sound so crazy.
You can't identify with it fully.
Yeah.
You can't imagine being in a Mexican desert, running in the mountains, getting dehydrated and being in dangerous situations, because that's not your thing.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think after he had that encounter at the beginning of the book with the pickup truck from the drug cartel, I was like, that would be sort of like, okay, I'm out. I'm going home, and you can write your own article. Like I'm not taking this job.
Okay.
But so I mean, I guess it's not fair, because if I rate it purely on the book itself, like it's very well written, so I would have to give it a 5. And it was very well researched too, because he talks about all kinds of like history of Leadville.
So you're giving it a technical 5 and an emotional 4.5.
In an emotional 4.5, exactly.
Well, I'm glad we got that cleared up. We spent half of the podcast talking about the book and half the podcast talking about how you score the book. Thank you for listening to another episode of Running Book Reviews. If you're a listener on Apple Podcasts and haven't left us a review yet, that would be a really good thing to do. I'd really appreciate it if you'd like to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Or if you'd like to leave us any kind of feedback about how we can improve, or suggest a book you'd like us to review in a future episode, you can leave us a comment or a word on any of our social media outlets. We are Running Book Reviews on Facebook and Instagram. And on Twitter, we are reviews_running. If you'd like to send us a conventional email, you can also get us at runningbookrareviews@gmail.com. Please follow us on social media and find out about new episodes when they're released. Or you can just subscribe to the podcast on your favorite streaming platform.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time on Running Book Reviews. Liz and I would like to dedicate this podcast to a running friend of ours, Michelle Bonnell, better known on social media as Mike Runs, who left us a couple of weeks ago quite suddenly, and we were quite surprised. We send all our thoughts out to his friends and family. We know he was a fantastic follower of our podcast and loved running and running books. Those were two of his favorite things. So we just want him to know we're thinking of him, want his family to know that we're thinking of him. Run strong, Mike.